Welcome to Beyond the Art, where creativity knows no bounds and innovation takes center stage. Join us on a captivating journey through the realms of the Native American art world, exploring the untold stories, inspirations, and the sheer brilliance that fuels the world of Indigenous artistry. Cannupa Hanska Luger, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great being here.
It's a pleasure. Well, we're just going to dive right into it and have you tell us and our listeners a little bit about your artistic journey and how you came to work in your current mediums.
Yeah, well, Dotsha Maragua, Dishkag Nahudosha Netwehudosha, I'm Cannupa Hanska Luger. I'm a citizen of the Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara tribe. So that's northern Missouri River people. Been river people for all the way back, but I currently live in New Mexico, Glorieta, New Mexico. So I'm on the top of a mountain, which is so foreign to a plains boy. But it's beautiful. And I came here to go to school at the Institute of American Indian Arts. And that was kind of my movement towards material and creative practice. My mom's an artist, Kathy Whitman Elk Woman. She's a stone sculptor, painter, jeweler, basically.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So I was raised on art. You know, she raised 5 kids with as an art practice and a single parent.
Busy mom.
Yeah, super busy mom, busy family. I mean, not an easy life. There was a lot of movement, a lot of travel, little instability in all of that. But at the same time, it definitely helped me realize that a art career was possible. Mm-hmm. And I kind of came into it sideways as far as my mom's kind of journey informed my journey. Mm-hmm. I knew where to zig, where she zagged, and vice versa. And so that I also was joke around about it, but like a booth baby, like a lot of my peers, grew up underneath the tables at your Santa Fe Indian Market and the whole variety of markets, Indian art markets. And I think that kind of stained me in a way that was like, I don't know if I want to play in this game, or at least this market. But it was my introduction to it, and I do also appreciate the work that had kind of taken place in that realm, as far as the maintenance of cultural visual languages from all over. So having access to that sort of stuff was always kind of useful and helpful. I used to write. Used to do poetry. I'm like 45 years old, just turned 45 this month. And back when I was a late teen, early 20s, in the 90s, late 90s, there was a thing called slam poetry, and I was super into slam poetry. So it was kind of a funny route through all of that trajectory of words. And then I would always draw. I enjoyed drawing, and started painting with a hip hop crew, actually, out of Olympia, Washington. There was a band that were all peers of mine called Saints of Everyday Failures. And I tried to be an MC, but I could not freestyle to save my life. And so I started painting live with them. I have like social anxiety. It's easier for me to be in front of everybody than amongst everybody. And so I found a way to kind of participate in the scene by painting live on stage. And then I ended up going to school at the Institute of American Indian Arts. And there I came in as a painter and realized that I had no idea how to paint. I drew with color at best, very graphic in its
to start.
Totally. Yeah. But it was interesting because my painting instructor would stand behind me every day that I was in class, and he would ask, Cannupa, are you going to push some paint today? And I would just be doing these little washes of color, trying to stack up a layer. And
your minimalist era.
Yeah, it was actually my current era of just being a cheap person. So like the cost of material was so high. I wasn't used to like buying paints from a paint store, and the cost of the material, even the acrylics, I was just like, oh man, I don't want to waste this material.
Right.
I was before I realized that like the process is the main thing, so you're learning along the way. And instead of learning anything, I was just trying to maintain money in my pocket, I think.
Food.
Yeah, exactly. But painting, once I realized that I just basically drew with color, I actually liked my style. And so I thought maybe what I should do is start from zero. And that was kind of my introduction to clay. And I started working with clay at the Institute of American Indian Arts and fell in love with it. And I think that journey through from words to two-dimensional illustrations, it was like ideas transformed into images. It's like how do you transform the words you're trying to say into a shape in space?
Right.
How do you communicate with symbol? And that introduction to 2D also left me kind of feeling like there was a limitation, which was the edge of the canvas, And so this introduction to clay allowed me to move more three-dimensionally, which I was like, oh, I like this. I'm actually shifting through the dimensions, 2D into 3D. 3D, I started sculpting. I grew up on a ranch in North Dakota, as well as Phoenix, Arizona. My parents divorced when I was young, so I was kind of going back and forth. And you pick up a lot of weird skills when you grow up on a ranch, so welding and general fabrication,
Right.
Also built out of just being cheap. It's like you could hire somebody to do this sort of thing, or you could get your kids to like figure it out,
Free labor. Yeah. Why not?
Yeah. Well, and I'm a dad, so I'm like, that labor ain't free. Well, you're paying for it all the time. So started working with clay, loved the material, was doing a lot of mixed media, steel fabrication and clay, kind of building up forms. And that made me kind of move towards installation art, kind of an overall immersive experience into an idea. And then that led me into film and video and
just
sound.
Branched out and everything else.
Yeah, just I like to think I'm just moving through all of these dimensions, of creativity. The nice thing is I picked up a bunch of random skills along the way. Mastered none of them, but could get by on a lot, which actually is really helpful for any sort of block on ideas or something like that. Being able to shift from materials is pretty helpful as far as, if you get exhausted with one concept, you can move on to another.
Yeah.
And all along that way, I've just been picking up random little bits of skills and trying to apply them. The thing that I enjoy about that, I like material, and I like what material brings to the conversation. And honestly, working with clay probably did a lot for my mental well-being. I'm an 80s kid. So yeah, and you'll probably understand this. There was an overarching kind of air to our generation, which was we wanted it all and we wanted it now. You were seeing that as like cable made it onto the reservation, as like what was normal. Was kind of presented to everybody, which made you look at your own life and be like, oh, this is a middle class family I'm watching here. And I'm like, shit, I'm poor. couldn't even tell when you're in it. You're like, everybody was at the same kind of level. So there was nothing, what do they say? Comparison is the thief of joy,
Right.
I don't know who said that, but somebody said that and it stuck with me.
I've heard it.
Yeah.
So your work often addresses themes of identity, indigenous rights, and environmental issues. What drives you explores these topics through your art, your particular art, and the mediums that you incorporate while you're doing this?
Yeah. I think I try not to sit so much with the identity narrative. I think what drives a lot of my work is an awareness of a certain privilege that I have. The privilege that I have is I was brought up right. I was raised in a way that being born in 1979, having our ceremonial practices just be a part of my life was huge, and I didn't understand how special that was until I got older. I took it for granted, really, because it was normal for me. And understanding that helped me started to inform me that there is cosmological knowledge that's embedded in ceremonial practice. Like these things that you do, the protocols that you follow, the taboos that you avoid, all of these things have significance when you start to kind of transcribe or translate the information that's being shared. And I'm one of those people who are always like, yeah, but why? Why do we do it that way?
Right.
And I was fortunate enough that a third of the people that I would ask had an answer. They would inform me. It's strange though, because the other 2/3 would say, we don't ask that question. We don't ask that. That's not why we do these things. It's not about the why, but I learned, through that final third, that searching for a response to some of the protocols, that there was purpose, and that having that purpose and being aware of that purpose actually supplies, what a Western world would acknowledge as like empirical science. It was like patience and observation was held and transmitted through the ceremonial practice, through the visual arts as well, through the symbolic language that's kind of perpetuated. That there is incredible knowledge embedded in our cosmologies, and growing up as a kid whose mother was an artist, we got to travel a lot, and that traveling actually kind of allowed us to meet other people, other cultures, really, and recognizing that there were archetypical connections between indigenous people, as well as like incredible variation.
Right. Absorption, I guess.
Yeah, totally. But I think it's the variety that really kind of moves my practice. Is that when you grow up under the kind of like Native American art market, the market is dictating a lot of what's being produced, and the market flattened us into a singularity. And I think what's important is to recognize the complexity of indigenous people in North America and South America, on the globe, that there are these archetypes that connect, but there is great complexity and variation between the two, where you wouldn't confuse one group with another if you were informed. So I think a lot of my practice presently is to celebrate that information, celebrate that diversity and that complexity, and trying to step out of being like a voice for all, but just a voice, a series of ideas that are being shared, and knowing that that's not the end of it, but this is, another skull on the pile to stand on top of,
So how does collaboration shape your creative process, and what do you hope to achieve through these partnerships?
Early in my career, I did a lot more collaborative work, where it was trying to generate work, social practice, social engineering kind of ideas. All of that kind of developed out of the introduction of social media. I remember when it came, I remember it, and it doesn't seem that long ago to me.
No.
I know there's entire generations who never knew anything other than that. But watching this develop, I was hard pressed to believe in it at first, because of my own I don't know, lack of giving a shit about your breakfast burrito in the morning. I didn't realize that there was a lot of interest in that sort of share. But as I saw this system develop, I recognized that, the internet and social media in particular was like a river that was wide and shallow, as I like to describe it. It's incredible moving ideas across this stream, but the depth of involvement is pretty thin. Liking and sharing isn't enough. So a lot of the social collaborative kind of projects that I've developed were built around utilizing the internet as a platform to share ideas. So I would generate prompts and try to simplify the prompt as simple as possible, as accessible as possible, and then allow people to participate in that. But this exchange wasn't it wasn't direct and personal. It was actually using social media as a medium. What can you develop with that distance and that separation? Is there a way to generate empathy through these systems that we navigate? And I explored that kind of early in my career and developed a few ideas using that. The Mirror Shield project at Standing Rock was the first one. I had a hard time. I didn't even know what I was doing at that point. What I was bearing witness to the power of social media as a source of information and misinformation. It's what kind of spurned this idea of like this river being wide and shallow, like liking and sharing are like thoughts and prayers.
Right.
It's like I want to see more. Like, and what I was realizing is that the people participating who were liking and sharing wanted to do more as well, but they were limited by their scope of participation and engagement by not knowing what was possible. And so I didn't know what was possible. And so trying out a few things to generate participation where you involve your time rather than likes and shares or thoughts and prayers. What happens when you invest your time? Because that's really the most valuable thing that we have as organisms on this planet, and time is pretty equitable,
Right.
The time of a billionaire and the time of a pauper are equal, finding out if you can carve that time out is another question, where I would say that the time of a pauper may be far more expensive than the time of a billionaire, as far as participation and involvement, which was interesting to me. And so doing that sort of work started to, unfold a bunch of different ideas, and collaboration kind of came through social media primarily. And then that actually informed me and made me realize that I'm collaborating all the time, that I've never done anything alone in this world, like ever, which was contrary to the systems that we navigate. It's contrary to the American dream. It's contrary to the myth of capitalism and this world as it's expressed, but as it's practically applied. Like, yeah, I mean, I didn't make this sweater, I didn't mine the materials for the clay that I sculpt with, the steel that I fabricate with, the minerals that are going into the paints that I access. There's like a wake of an economy that ripples out of any individual. And when you lean into that, you recognize that this like myth of rugged individualism is a sad myth, is a story that separates you from all of these connections. And so, I would actively participate and try to work with other artists and generate some ideas and some collaborative work. And then recognize that even if I'm not actively collaborating, I'm collaborating. So how do you do
Right.
that more responsibly, And so as my career kind of blossomed and grew, being aware of who I'm working with to fabricate certain components or ask for like where my materials are coming from, and being aware of that, you can kind of push the economy that ripples out around you. So I'm still in it, still collaborating.
You mentioned materials and ceramics and the steel that you use in some of your pieces. Your use of materials like ceramics and found objects is absolutely striking. How do you select your materials, and what role do they play in really conveying your message?
Yeah. So as my career was kind of moving along, and I'm starting to do film and installation, I started to I started to recognize that like trying to, and I'm old enough to see all of this stuff. There was a moment while I was in school at the Institute of American Indian Arts at IAI that I had a collective that I worked with called Humble, and we were producing and making really great work, and we were kind of doing it collaboratively. We were painting on top of each other. We would put together uh, music shows in Santa Fe and invite people over to our space. And we had to do it all word of mouth. We couldn't promote it in any sort of way. At that time, this is like 2007, 2008, 2009. The city of Santa Fe was actively kind of like trying to shut down these art co-ops.
Wow.
Yeah, it was fascinating. Well, Santa Fe is it's like a Disney World version of the
Right.
Southwest. It's
Right.
not. It's not. It's a sanctuary for this kind of like retiree kind of space, but also the market of art. And I think without control of the market, it challenges everything in that space. And the work that we were producing was, it was like communicating what had happened to Native people in the last 200 years,
Yeah.
And recognizing that there was valuable information in our contemporary experience, not just in the materials that we were, but the content of the work. Like what's the information like? Is it recognizably indigenous work? Is it influenced by pop culture? It's like, yeah, dude, we were all raised on like Nickelodeon and MTV. We had way
Right.
too much sugar cereal when we were kids, and all of that stuff was like this was like political activation on a population. And there was an entire generation, there was like several generations born with the impact of forced assimilation, with the impact of displacement, with the impact of rugged individualism as the narrative. And here we were painting collaboratively, like trying to sell a collaborative painting was a pain in the ass. Like, how do you split that 5 ways,
Right. Right.
in a capitalist market kind of narrative. But, I think as we were doing this sort of work, we were expanding and opening up the ideas of what Native art was, and quickly recognized that the market wasn't actually asking Native people what Native art was.
Yep.
It was dictating what Native art was. And as we were developing that and wanting to do kind of more conversations content-wise that were explicit about our present time, I recognized that there was a hurdle there. There was a wall kind of embedded in leaping from a romantic, historical kind of preserved narrative of Native people versus our continued and present existence.
The reality.
And the reality of it, right?
Yeah.
And I found for me, it was like easier to jump the present and move into the future. And I was like, if I could create, and I'm a sci-fi fan, and I never see any like Native science fiction where, whether it's written by us or about us, we didn't exist in that future concept. And rather than trying to find it, I was like, well, just start making it. And if I can make an indigenous future narrative and embed us in that place, then I can bypass the present and talk about our future. And I think that opened up a whole series of work that I've been working on lately, which is called Future Ancestral Technologies. And it's a look at, for a keyword search on the internet, indigenous futurism, but I don't really know what that means. Our concepts of time are nonlinear, and so talking about future is kind of perpetuates this like linear narrative.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe that I can generate future spaces in my mind and in the minds of the audiences that engage with my work that are kind of broad stroke and allow that incredible dreaming imagination point for us to consider a path forward that isn't entangled with our present narratives. Gives us another option to choose from.
Right.
And so with that, like my relationship to materials kind of came out of this. Like when I was working on future ancestral technologies at the beginning, I wasn't trying to write a science fiction novel or imagine it as a film. I recognized my point of privilege, my point of access, my proximity to power was really through museums and exhibitions. And in that way, rather than having like a linear timeline or a story to be told, it looked more like a D&D dungeon manual, where it was like, here are the circumstances of this future place. How do you adapt? How do you make a life with all of the ancestral knowledge that I'm aware of, that's kind of been moved through time, and what I've been exposed to, not just from my own culture, but from the cultures plural that I live in. How do those bleed? How do those blend? How do those in flux create something new? And being able to generate from that space was liberating. Where it's like, I know there's things that we're not supposed to share, but I know that lack of sharing has a lot to do with the trauma of previous generations and present generations. So what does it look like when we've already healed from that trauma? What does it look like when we're when survival transforms into thriving? And that future space is where I could kind of imagine that and develop that, and also not give away something that nobody's earned,
Right.
Nobody's sacrificed for. And so a part of that dungeon manual was like, all right, what's going to be in that future space? And I was like, dude, the detritus of our present is going to be in that future space. The speed and the level at which the Industrial Revolution started to produce material, and then consumerism and planned and perceived obsolescence, like all of these sorts of components have generated so much material that I believe our future, rather than like recycling or disintegrating or incinerating or just throwing into the ocean, whatever all of our present practices of dealing with our remnants, how do we mine our present? How do we actually, instead of extracting from the earth, extract from our history, and develop an aesthetic based on repurposing the detritus of our present in that future space. And so that's what informed my relationship to found objects, was like, okay, I can imagine this in that future space, but I can practice that in the present. So like, what am I producing that's byproduct? What is what around me is available? And that seems like tradish as fuck, like the this notion of our traditions being embedded in a timeline rather than in a concept. The concept is like, dude, we adapt, we've always adapted, and we utilized whatever material was accessible at the time, and we killed it when we did that, when nobody was restricting us from adapting to what we have around us. I think human beings, or the species in general, we've invested a lot in adaptation. Like that's our fang, that's our claw,
Right.
is that. So just lean into it. And that's what kind of informed my use of secondary material, secondary products, byproducts, waste material, and applying those found objects to a new aesthetic.
Is there a process you go through when you start finding objects of something you want to actually start creating and incorporating into your pieces?
Really, it's about accessibility. Most of the materials that I tend to work with are things like hookups. I use a lot of industrial wool right now, and a friend of mine years ago was like, "I have some industrial felt, some like wool felt. Do you want it?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And she came over and dropped it off, and it was like 300 pounds of it, like 6 huge trash bags of remnant wool. And I was like, this is going to take up a lot of space in my studio. Like, when you said I want some, I didn't realize it was going to be so much.
A
Like,
little
where did you?
clipping or
Yeah, totally. And I was like, where did you get this from? And she informed me of a company in Albuquerque called Submaterial, and they make like soundproofing for the shitty architecture of the 90s, where it's like, okay, this used to be an office, now it's a restaurant or a brewery
Right.
or some sort of thing, but we need to address the resonance in here. And so there's been a whole kind of like growth and development in soundproofing and sound dampening in spaces. And there's a company in Albuquerque that does it, and they use Filzfelds from Germany, which are really nice wool. It's wool, but it comes on huge roll, like 15-foot long rolls. Outside of my reach, if I were to buy a whole roll to myself, I wouldn't even know what to do with all of that. I mean, I would figure it out. I would absolutely figure it out. But they are producing so much work that their scrap remnant, like that 300 pounds that she brought me, is like some.
Wow.
They have tons of waste, and they've given it away. They give it away to like schools and different things like that for craft ideas and whatnot. And they've been a really kind of great hookup here. But then that adapts and changes. Like, I don't know how to work with wool, but you figure it out, you by working with the material.
Trial and error.
Exactly. And it's around the accessibility. Like, the ideas come from this collaboration and this cooperation between myself and the material and what the material can possibly do. And that's kind of what sparks ideas and generates like, okay, these are the things that I have to work with. What's the story that can be told with these things? And does it fit within my, D&D dungeon manual of future ancestral technologies? And then you develop these skill sets, and then you're like, okay, I can do more with this. And so even if it's not within the scope of future ancestral technology, you have this like new skill set that, and you get to know what this material can do and how to work with it and how you can push it to its edge, And so that's really helpful creatively.
How does your heritage influence your artistic vision and the themes you explore in your work?
There's this conversation that would always pop up when I was in school, which was like, how does it go? Are you a Native American artist, or are you an artist who happens to be Native American?
Yeah.
And I'm like, that is a dumb question. I'm like, one's an occupation and one's a cultural context.
Yeah.
Like, I cannot separate myself from my heritage. It's in my genes, but it's also in my cultural lens and filter.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't separate that because it
It's
is
equal.
who I am. Like, artist is a job. It's what it's a choice that I get to do every time I wake up in the morning. I don't get that choice with my heritage,
Yeah, it's in your DNA, it's in your blood, it's in your flesh and bones.
Right. So how does it inform? I mean, shoot, it informs the way I make a fried bacon in the morning. It informs the way that I change my oil. So I think it's an interesting question. I think it's an interesting question for everyone to ask, but I think it's also why I was hesitant to say that there is identity embedded in the work that I do. I'm not exploring or trying to understand my identity. I'm aware of who I am, and who I am is becoming. I'm not a thing or an object. I'm a process. And so that trying to explore identity in that sense is usually like an external filter or an access point for the larger system to accept you as a person. They're interested in us as object and as artifact before they're interested in us as a human being, or a organism, like there are these steps to move through, and I'm like, you can figure that out, as an institution or as a art writer or whatever, as a reporter, like you can embed whatever narrative it is that you want to impose on that, but that's not true to what's happening in my practice. If there is identity embedded in it, it's because I'm aware of who I am and what I bring to the table. These are all just access points for inspiration. These are filters to examine the world that I presently live in. And so if it finds its way into the work, it's because I can't omit it. It's source material.
Right. Well, a lot of your work, your installations often provoke thoughtful reflection and dialogue. How do you hope viewers will engage and interpret your art? What message are you trying to convey? A message that they understand? Or are you trying to convey a message that's really going to get them deep thinking of what you're trying to say?
Yeah,
I'm and more the story behind it.
I think I'm more interested in the latter. My the secret sauce is I really am not that interested in how it's interpreted individually. I know what I'm trying to say, and I navigate and move, thinking that I'm going to express. I mean, art is a form of communication. So, like, am I communicating properly? I do the best I can in my studio to communicate directly, correctly, and with symbol,
Right.
But because I'm operating in shapes in space, I have a great awareness and recognition that every single person who enters into that space brings their own filter, brings their own cultural context, brings their own experiences and traumas and revelries and ecstatic experiences. They bring all of that to the work when they are in the process of trying to make it make sense. And that's cool. Like, I like misinterpretation outside of what I'm trying to communicate because it's generative. Then suddenly the work that is objectified through the systems that we navigate actually becomes a trigger for people to consider something else, and I think that's the profound privilege that I have as an artist, is that I can put in motion options that do not presently exist, and in a country that is hyper focused on this rugged individualism, on this idea that you can lift yourself up, and this notion of like freedom embedded in individualistic choice, it distracts you from the more scary part of that, which is who's giving you the options. It's like you're free to choose, but you got to choose between only these two things. And I'm like, that's the secret deception that allows us to be complacent. It's like, I got all this freedom, and I got all these choices. but really the choices are limited, and the freedom that you have is individualistic. So I'm like, I want to know about something else, and the other thing that I'm interested in, elsewise, is doesn't exist yet. So I can put in motion the possibility of people imagining something that doesn't exist. So the future generations have more options when they are imagining and applying their individualistic choice, you know.
Your recent projects have received significant attention. Can you tell us about one or two of your recent works and the inspiration behind it?
I think maybe the last project that I can think of that has kind of outside of my wheelhouse was a project at the University of Michigan Museum of Art. And it was done in collaboration and cooperation with Monument Lab, which is another really kind of cool concept and idea and system of navigating art and what a monument is in the country. Paul Farber, who's become a friend of mine working through this project at University of Michigan, started doing research and study around what a monument is before society was like demanding whether or not these monuments serve us anymore, you know? And so by time that became a part of the, I don't know, zeitgeist, you know, the idea that, you know, this theme and idea of like, do these monuments represent the population in which they're proximity to? You know, are these pivotal points to celebrate or commemorate? You know, what is a monument? What's its purpose? That informed me quite a bit, you know, just chopping it up with him, going out to dinner, working on this project at University of Michigan. The project came with a prompt, which was, how do we remember? And it came with an image, which was the front of the old part of the museum, which was this like Greco-Roman architecture, right? The big, stone pillars. This like idea that I find kind of nefarious architecturally. Like the United States has this repeated process of kind of like trying to deal with its own displacement, right? So like the country, you know, doesn't want to recognize that the vast majority of the population that came here came under duress, you know, came under being removed from where they are. They want to perpetuate this narrative of like intrepid explorers, you know, bringing civilization to a population. But you realize that the vast majority of those boats coming over, I mean, a large number of the people who were, you know, first on the Mayflower or first on, you know, whatever ship that arrived here, were fleeing countries for some sort of like religious
purpose
freedom.
And cause,
yeah, totally. And vastly is like, what would you call them? Not the best that the country had to provide, you know, that they were coming from. Like a lot of them were criminal, you know, and that there was a system of, you know, rather than being hung, to be put on a ship and moved across the country and work in a colony in a world away, you know.
Yeah, just like they did with Australia, you know, it became a penal colony for the throwaways.
Exactly.
You know? Don't have them with us, put them over here. Yeah.
Totally. And that, I mean, what informed that was this movement away from European countries to America. It's like there wasn't declared as a penal colony, but I promise you the idea of turning Australia into one was to address where to put all of the other criminals that were being removed from society, you know? Wow, I'm going on a side tangent with all of that, but what I'm trying to express with it and working with University of Michigan is that there's trauma of that displacement, and without addressing it, you make up some sort of repair for it. And one of the things that I saw and that I continue to see, and then particularly you see it at government buildings and schools, like major institutions across the country, is this pervasive subconscious expression that this country is so old that there are Greco-Roman temples, across the land, and they're a threat to me. I'm like, dude, those aren't real.
Right.
You're making up a deep time relationship to place by dragging architectural information from one region and embedding it here to reinforce this idea that you've been here long enough, and you haven't. Like, this country is a baby, and it's jacked up. It's jacked up on its own self-grandized kind of version of what it is. And I'm not surprised, because the architecture that we put in schools, where, these hubs for education and learning, are littered with subconscious reminders of a history that did not exist here. So you've got your Greco-Roman architecture, your pillars, these temples to like Zeus and Apollo and Mercury and Athena, embedded in your schools of learning, which subconsciously tells every student who enters into that space that you are less than this, that this is great and you are insignificant. When the people who are operating that are the people who went to that school, and there's this subconscious narrative of dominion and dominance that's informed by this architecture. And if it's not Greco-Roman, it's, Gothic church architecture. It's this superimposition of time in this country. And I'm like, dude, you're really cheating yourself out of something really profound and beautiful by believing in the dream, in the myth. And so this project with University of Michigan was, how do we remember, was the prompt. And then the front of this building was the image that I saw. And I immediately thought, like, dude, museums are a threat to me. They are not inviting spaces. They don't feel safe. And I imagine that architecture as a white space, and then I have to start questioning, like, what is white? What does that even mean? Like, at what point do you get to be white in this country? Because skin tone did not declare that upon first arrival. You had to sever your relationship to place in order to be white in America. You had to be void of deep time connection. You had to be void of relationship to land. And this Greco-Roman architecture, for me, I imagine it as a white space. And I was like, it's not even white. It's actually, when I look at it, outside of my mind, the projection of it, it's actually kind of yellow and tan and gray and streaks of other colors, because it's made out of sandstone from Ohio, because it's made out of this place, but transformed into a foreign form. And so I was like, here's what I'm going to do. How many people are also experiencing this subconsciously? How many students at the University of Michigan don't enter into the museum because of this subconscious kind of threat? Can we make this space white, but white in the symbol? And so we painted the whole front surface of this building with kaolin from Georgia, another material from this place. And it's white, stark white. And we wrote gift on the 4, pillars that were at the front of the building, to address the narrative of, this is a land grant school, and it was, quote unquote, a gift from the tribes from the region, the Ojibwe, I think there's a 12 Fires Council, or I think that's what it is. I can't remember now because it's been a little bit. But these, in this narrative and this creation of this school, there was as a land grant, they have this narrative of it being a gift from the tribes, and that this treaty was created so that they could annex this land and create a school for higher learning, and that the tribes' future generations would have access to it. Well, they didn't end up building it in the place that the land was granted to them, or seized or annexed or whatever,
Stolen.
yeah, language you want to use. But the word gift kind of hung in their land acknowledgement narratives and their creation story of the university. And so we wanted to kind of like embed gift on those pillars and recognize that like all of it's a gift.
Right.
All of it is if you think about it, like our indigenous highest form of wealth wasn't how much you had, but how much you could give. And so how do we recognize that form of wealth in this country? How do we recognize the history of this school and the impact of the student bodies that have come and gone from this place and where they're seated in positions of power across the country? How do we recognize that all of that distills down to the generosity of the people from that place? Right. And I was like, if we paint this building white and we use kaolin from Georgia, the environment is going to wash that whiteness off of the surface of it. We're not going to fix it. We're not going to set it. We're just going to paint it on clay, thin wash over the surface of it. We're going to whitewash this building, and we're going to allow the weather to wash that building, to wash the whiteness off of that building. Is there a subconscious byproduct of that? Does the student body, the population that navigates the green spaces across the campus, does that inform them, of that the building wasn't ever white? That there is a rich color and variation in the stone that looks like Carrara marble, right. Looks like Athens and Greece, but is in fact Ohio, displaced and put in Michigan. Is there that conversation that can shake out? And like, once again, I can't know. We did this kind of like subversively. We created a whole nother exhibition to promote my being at the university and doing this project. And we, in the 4:00 in the morning on homecoming weekend, I wrote gift on the 4 pillars and let it ride for like a week. And then, we got a business to come and address the graffiti on the front of the building. And rather than washing it off, they just covered the whole thing with the same material. And so there were, lifts in place and people working to address this sort of thing. And what it left was, rather than washing it away, we cover it up with more of the same, And all of that I thought was, highly conceptual and like so far out of my wheelhouse. But it was great working. It was great working with Monument Lab as being a interface between myself and the institution. Making sure that the meetings that I were on were meetings that I actually had to be on, and weren't a part of the institution's kind of bureaucratic, systematic practices, Right. But it took 2 years to do that. It took 2 years to put in motion and get the right receipts and certificates and, tests to make sure that, this clay wasn't going to destroy the sandstone. Right. We had to create a clay filter so that the clay wouldn't run into the storm drains and make it into the river. We had to address all of this sort of stuff. And I'm like, there's like cars leaking oil on the street.
Right.
I'm like, how is clay, which is literally comes from that river. You can find it in there in mass. It's actually the rivers make clay. Like, how is that? I don't know. All of that sort of
destructive,
stuff. It was really informative to me. Like, what institutions, what our systems, what our community, what our country values, what we allow slide, and what we obsessively try to control. And to me, I'm like, oh yeah, you don't want the land to have agency. You don't want these natural systems to have freedom. You want to restrict it as much as possible. Because it gives you a sense of dominion, and I'm like, what a weird and toxic space. And the messed up thing is everybody is like, they always shake their head and like, the bureaucracy of institutions,
Right.
but they perpetuate it because they've had to go through it, and they'll be damned if somebody gets to get to their same position, their pillar of power, their silo, without having to navigate the same BS that they had to navigate, which is like, that's informative. That's really
Right.
informative for me, as a new material to kind of navigate, to access, like to look at the systems that we shift through. So that one got some good press.
So, looking ahead, what future projects or collaborations are you excited about, and what new themes or ideas are you eager to explore in your work and your art, and what's next for you?
Yeah, the next big thing that's unfolding is, I have a few exhibitions going into Pacific Standard Time. So this is all on the West Coast in California. Pacific Standard Time comes around every, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. I can't remember
Mm-hmm.
what the breakdown is. Um, and it's through the Getty Foundation. They kind of develop a theme, and then all of the museums that want to participate or get access to participate are supported,
Mm-hmm.
to develop a consistent theme to all exhibitions across California. Now they can work with that theme and bend it and shift it to address components of it, but there is kind of like an overarching narrative. This one coming up is going to be, it's like they said art and science collide at first, but then that didn't feel right, felt a
Right.
little too aggressive. So I don't know if they're working with intersection of art and science or something else thematically, but it is, where, this cross section and this intersection and this form of communication that develops through art and science, and how do you celebrate that? So I'm one of like, I think 8 commission artists at the Hammers exhibition, which is called Breathe. I'm presently working on that and excited to put this work into the space. I'm developing like sovereignty suits. It's a conversation around what a spacesuit is and where space begins. And I was like,
Cool.
I'm like, the LA's space. The Hammer Museum is in space.
Right.
It is in space, and for a lot of people, it is also hostile. So what kind of suit do you need to maintain to survive and thrive in an inhospitable environment?
Mm-hmm.
I think spacesuits as we imagine it, especially as like Hollywood and this is in
Right.
Beverly Hills, this is part of UCLA. Like it's a very specific site where this is placed, and I wanted to open up the conversation that, like, presently we're there are billionaires developing space programs, to escape the gravity of this place and franchise the human race in another area. And I'm like, we're in space, and the ship we're on is legit. Like, it is legit. So how do we survive here, and what does that look like? And that a spacesuit as we imagine it, especially through that like 1950s Hollywood sci-fi concept that informs a lot of our present, of what a spacesuit is, only sustains the organism, but does not sustain the culture. And I'm like, we need to maintain culture. Like, you're not a complete organism without all of these protocols, without all of these taboos, without all of these valuable aspects that generations have brought to you, what does a suit look like that carries that, And so that's kind of the thing for the Hammer. I also have existing work going into the Autry Museum, and their exhibition. And one of the things I'm really excited about is actually in San Diego, at the San Diego New Children's Museum. This is the first time that I'll be working in a children's museum, and their model is really kind of incredible. They invite contemporary artists to create environments that kids get to play on. So it's a different way to generate work, and it's really exciting to me because I'm like, I kind of hope that that's what museums are in the future. Like, I think I think a new children's museum is at this point of something that we really need as a society, which is a tactile and immersive experience with the cultures that are being perpetuated through the museum as a framework. That to separate yourself, to remove your body from the experience of culture, removes an incredible sense organ, that we've invested a lot of mental space on. To inform future generations. And so I'm like, maybe they're not children's museums that exist in the future, but a museum that invites people to engage with the cultures that are represented in the way that the culture is intended for the work to be represented, which is immersive, which is tactile.
So are you giving thought about your own child and what they would experience if they went into this environment?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
My kids are my whole family. We are some stubborn, vocal people. And a big part of my wife and I's child rearing practices is about their own agency, and so we because I said so is never a good enough response. Although now I wish it was, but I've already put in motion that that's not valid, and there's always some sort of debate that takes place. But I think that generates a really good idea, and they are informative. They're also better connected to the digital world that they were raised in, and that form of communication is so vastly different than my own experienced form of communication that they're really helpful in that sense. But without accessing my kids directly, one of the things that they brought to my attention was that I have trained, stifled, isolated, and disassociated my own child, my own interior part of myself that is the source of most of the imagining and creative spirit that I have, has been like not allowed into so many spaces in our society. And I'm like, dude, don't think of it as a children's museum. Think of it as a museum for our whole self,
Right.
What does that look like, for our future, for imagining something different? It's great to inform kids and allow kids to engage with spaces like that. But I think equally as important is to reawaken that child in ourselves, and like address the shortcomings and the lack of access that maybe our childhood didn't have, to recognize that we still have access to that point, and we can still engage with the world with that same sense of wonder, because we don't know shit. Like we're still learning.
We're still trying to figure it out.
Exactly. And the flexibility and the pliability of a child's mind is way more receptive than the rigid form that we are reinforced over and over and over, So how do we address that? How do we have some more neuroplasticity? How do we recognize that we still have access to those points of like just complete wonder of experiencing something that we have never seen before, We can do that. Let's just do that.
Let's do it. So before we wrap up, Cannupa, is there anything else you'd like to add and share with us?
I've been informed that you always say yes. That when operating with self-promotion and PR firms, when that question pops up, you say yes, and you restate what you think is most important. With that being said, I would say the last thing that I said about recognizing our neuroplasticity, recognizing our inner child, recognizing that we have agency in the development and the imagining of our future is what I'm most invested in as an artist. And that I don't get to decide. Like you get to decide. We collectively get to decide what our future looks like. We don't have to march into the existing path that we see rolled out in front of us, because we can see that it careens off a ledge into an abyss. We have no idea of what that is, but that's true about every concept of this linear trajectory. We don't know. And so we can imagine something that doesn't exist, and we can collectively work towards that. And I think that's the filter in which I'm interested in our future generations and our present generations to explore the world that they navigate. Do not let it grind you down. Recognize that all of these points are points to recognize that there could be something better, that there can be something different. And the work that I'm trying to generate is to just spark that possibility, that what we know is finite,
Right.
What we don't
Very
know
true.
is infinite. Let's operate from that space.
Well, sir, great ending comments, and I appreciate it. And you've been a complete pleasure to have on the show, and much success continuing forward with you.
Yeah. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, everybody out there listening.
It's been an honor, and we will chat soon.
Wonderful.
Thank you for embarking on this artistic journey with us. Keep exploring, keep creating. Until we meet again, let your imagination soar beyond the art. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on your preferred podcast platform.